a relatively pristine coastline, to Tierney, a fishing village and headquarters for the reserve. For the next several days, we explored Sikhote-Alin. Yevgeny Smirnov, the reserve's lead tiger biologist, took us straight to areas of tiger activity. He showed us tracks made only the night before, within a quarter-mile of our cabin. He took us to a ridge-top crossing where a huge male had lain in the deep snow, presumably on the lookout for the wild boar or red deer numerous in that area. We saw tracks of a mother and two cubs within sight of the outskirts of Tierney. Truly, Howard and I agreed, we were in tiger country. And yet tiger numbers had been extremely low when Sikhote-Alin was established. Some estimate only about 50 individuals. Once plentiful throughout Siberia, from Lake Baikal east to the coast and south into China and Korea, the Siberian tiger, also called the Amur tiger, had been hunted relentlessly for its skin and body parts, important in Asian folk medicine, and had disappeared from most of its former range. Ironically, it began a recovery under communist rule, when closed borders limited legitimate trade such as lumbering and illegitimate activities like poaching. By 1985, there were an estimated 450 tigers in the Sikhote-Alin, a remarkable comeback, we thought, although the Russian scientists cautioned that 450 tigers was really not so many. Little did we suspect that scarcely 2 years later, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the opening of its borders, tigers would again be under siege. We left Sikhote-Alin Reserve greatly encouraged by what we had seen and experienced. The tigers were certainly there. The officials and scientists welcomed us and urged the study. The people were warm and friendly. And the landscape, little known to the Western world, was breathtaking. As the big old Aeroflot helicopter lifted off the snowy field at Tierney, Howard and I knew we would be back. We spent the next several days flying to outposts and villages in the Bikin River drainage, the last stronghold of the Udege, the native people who still revere the tiger. When an elderly Udege woman, a longtime friend of Dr. Pikunov, asked why we Americans were there, he replied that we wanted to help save the tiger. She replied that only the Udege were really concerned about the tiger's well-being. Besides, she said good-naturedly, Americans are like flies. They are everywhere. On the long flight back to Moscow, passing through 7 time zones, Howard and I mapped our strategy. We knew what awaited us in Moscow, excruciating sessions with a hard-nosed Russian negotiator, literally locked in a hotel room. Our predictions were painfully accurate. Reeling from fatigue and conceding practically every point of contention, some 18 hours later we emerged with a joint Russian-American agreement for the study of the Siberian tiger. We took some solace in the knowledge that such an agreement was essential to our effort to raise the necessary research funding. Nevertheless, at first no one would consider committing long-term significant funding for work in Communist Russia. Finally, the National Geographic Society awarded us a generous grant. Their support convinced others to help, notably the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the National Wildlife Federation. So on January 1st, 1992, almost 2 years after our initial visit, and after an additional fact-finding trip, Howard and Kathy Quigley, Dale McKell, and I arrived in far eastern Russia to begin the actual field research. Kathy, Howard's wife, is project veterinarian, highly trained in carnivore tranquilization. Dale had spent a year studying tigers in Nepal and had recently completed his doctorate studying moose in Denali Park in Alaska. Our research approach was straightforward: study the tiger and its habitat, and establish a solid foundation of knowledge. This would include all information about the tiger's biology and ecology, its life needs and its behavior. We would also study the animals that tigers prey upon and the total environment in which they lived. With this knowledge, we would be in a strong position to make recommendations to government authorities and to local residents on what measures must be taken to save the tiger. In studying a secretive species like tigers, direct observation is impossible. Instead, we observe them indirectly by utilizing radiotelemetry. Each tiger is captured with a cable snare, and a collar carrying a small transmitter is placed on its neck. The transmitter sends an identifying signal, allowing us to monitor tigers from season to season and from year to year, gaining information on individuals and on the population at large. In February 1992, Howard, Kathy, and Dale, along with Igor Nikolaev and Yevgeny Smirnov, captured and collared a Siberian tiger. In June 1992, we made our second capture, a big mature tigress we named Lena. Since then, we have placed radio collars on 20 more tigers. From monitoring these tigers, some for 7 years now, we know how much space they require, what they eat, how often they breed, what becomes of the young, how they react to human activities, and what makes for good tiger habitat. We now have the information that can save the Siberian tiger from extinction. Working with our Russian colleagues, we submitted a tiger habitat protection plan to the Russian Ministry of the Environment in Moscow. They have adopted this plan as part of the government's official plan for tiger conservation. We have worked with Dr. Astafyev at Sikhote Alin to implement his plan to expand the reserve to incorporate critical tiger habitat, an expansion that could be compared to enlarging Yellowstone by 20% to provide for grizzly bears or bison. We secured the funding in the United States to accomplish this from the Exxon Corporation through the Save the Tiger Fund. It is fact, however, that any conservation program anywhere in the world requires attention to more than just biology. A successful conservation program must consider economics, politics, and the human culture. From the beginning, we have attempted to address all these factors. But before we could be effective, we had to gain credibility. We did so through hard work and a spirit of cooperation. We hired the 3 top Russian tiger specialists. We hired and trained young Russian technicians and aides. We provided for Russian student participation, working with their advisors at the University of Moscow. We created a truly cooperative effort at the local and regional levels. We not only worked alongside our Russian colleagues on a daily basis, we bought property when it became possible to do so, and moved into neighborhoods in the village of Tierney. In other words, we became part of the community. Now, when we urge sustained yield forestry practices, for example, we do so in a unified Russian-American voice. And when we discuss alternatives to such traditional extractive industries as mining and logging, we speak with the support of our Russian colleagues. In the past, commerce in sustainable forest products, such as berries, nuts, mushrooms, ginseng, and wild honey, flourished in many communities. We are working with community leaders to revive many of these economically viable cottage industries. Such practices can enhance a forest ecosystem for tigers and their prey, while providing for the people. For it is essential that local and regional people be convinced it is in their best interest to conserve rather than to kill tigers. And in order for that to happen, there must be a viable economy in place that sustains rather than destroys the forest. If we can bring about favorable economic development, favorable to the forest and to tigers, politics and politics